Did you ever play a game as a kid that after you got to the title screen, you didn't just mash start game? Like, did you ever bother to actually explore the other menus on the title screen? I would be so excited for a game that on the way back from the store, I'd be in the back seat, popping open the box and just sitting down to like look at the artwork, look at the case, read the manual. And I think with that same energy, one of the things I found on the title screen most of the time when I was growing up was the sound test. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this video. You don't really see sound tests in gaming anymore, but welcome to Backseat Gaming. I hope that visual was very necessary. And overall, I think I just wanted to do a video about like bleeps and bloops, you know, why they are a product of their time or whatever. Sound tests, bleeps and bloops. That's the point of this video. How about that? When it comes to things that especially like literally sound like game music, because I think nowadays, you know, like games have like AAA games especially, you know, they have like soundtracks. Like they've got like these freaking like orchestras that were recorded in London and like, you know, these really intelligent, visionary composers. Sometimes it's one guy with a DAW in a room somewhere. When I was a kid, the idea of a video game soundtrack wasn't really a thing. It was just like the sound test, basically, the title of this video. And you know, that stuff does include, when I was growing up anyways, just straight up like bleep, bloops, and blops. Stuff that made it sound like, you know, like those Swap Meet toys that when you boot it up, it does like the little I am a little butterfly jingle when you turn it on. The bleeps, the bloops, the chip tunes is, I think, what, I don't know if that's like the real term for it or what people just call it now. I would say still have quite a soft spot in my heart. I think because the internet has been making me think about like 2016 a lot lately. I was looking back and I know it's obvious that I'm not the only person that feels this way. You know, like in the 2010s, for example, there was tons of games from that era, like especially if they had even some sort of pixel art style games like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Celeste, VVV, which I hope that's how you pronounce it, and it's not some kind of like silent V, whatever type of pronunciation. But anyways, while they don't sound like they're straight out of like a NES or something, they're definitely inspired by it. So this had me thinking about like what the heck was like my first, like when I actually cared about video game music. And I thought about it because like I grew up with the original Nintendo. Like my pops was a big fan of just the original Mario Brothers for sure. And so they were catchy songs, you know, like it was like it really fit the levels and stuff, and they were very memorable, you know, especially as a kid. Mario Brothers 3 specifically was the one that was like, whoa, like each world has its own like music, and like secret stages have their own thing going on. Like they did a really good job that the music in Mario Brothers 3 really conveyed what it was supposed to. But I guess like those like Swap Meet controllers that had like, you know, like 1,000 games in one, and you would just plug in the AV cables into the TV. I had one of those too. That was also full of like Nintendo games, but also like a lot of Atari and just short like arcade stuff. And so music in games to me, like when I was growing up, I guess, was like super, like, I guess you like, it's almost like a tool, you know, it's really utilitarian. Is that the word? But I guess the point being is it wasn't like, oh my God, like the World 6 from Mario Brothers gives me the chills. It really hits me in my soul. I did learn to appreciate it a lot more as I got older and learned more about, I guess, composition and stuff. I can pinpoint the exact time where I really thought about like, wow, games have music in them. Being such a big fan of music always. I mean, that's the thing that I like to make. It's my chosen art form when I'm not doing YouTube. The first time I ever experienced it was with the third Sonic game, Straight Out. I think for example, every songwriter has like, man, like I wish I had written that song. You know, like I wish, like that's such a genius song and I wish it was mine, but I'm glad it exists. That's, that's Ice Cap Zone for me. And it's funny, like, you know, as time passed and I learned like the history of like how that soundtrack was made and why it's kind of like in like a bit of a dubious copyright fight. I don't know what's going on with it. But the idea that Michael Jackson was involved somehow was like, oh, okay, that totally checks out. Because, you know, Michael Jackson was like my dad's obsession. So naturally, like I saw all of his music videos and music and I loved it growing up. So it was like very fitting, I guess, that Sonic 3 was like my first experience that this was so good. And so that was like the first game I remember actually genuinely being in the sound test for it. Not just because like that's where you would input like cheat codes. So that's how you got to pick all the levels in Sonic 3. But because I really was just like, like even just being here in like the main menu music, like the file select music was so memorable. And I would sit there for like, hours listening to like music from stages that I was just not good enough to reach as a kid yet. And really like just sinking my teeth into like just sitting down and listening to it like I would, I guess, not normal music, but just like normal music, like regular music that you would hear outside of games. And this totally spread to other Sonic games too. Like Sonic Spinball had a pretty memorable soundtrack. The second Sonic obviously was great. First one was awesome too. I mean, especially if you're a big fan of like jazz and like this whole city pop explosion that happened later on for music, like not a couple years back, I mean, it totally checks out that the first Sonic music had, I don't want to say those roots, but just made by a Japanese band, and so I guess it has that taste to it. And what blew my mind is that it started to let me like appreciate, I guess, older like video game music too, because listening to Sonic made me realize that like, you know what, these are such jams, and people are making ridiculous sounding songs with what is obviously like some type of limitation. Like even as a kid, I was aware like, hey, like sometimes like you can only hear like the music when there's no sound effects playing, or sometimes there's like only like four instruments playing at a time, which I mean, I didn't understand like what was going on, but I understood that there's definitely like something going on where they can't make it sound like a CD, because that's what I was listening to is CDs. Sound tests were awesome because it's like it was the only place, like there was no YouTube, right? Like that didn't exist yet. Basically, like imagine like stories and scenarios in my head to like when I would be playing with like action figures and stuff like that. Especially like I remember Sonic was real good at this. Like I would sit down and I would imagine like, okay, like hell yeah, like this is like the music to like, I don't know, like my main toy's room, and this is the music that would play when they're going to go fight the big bad guy, like you'd play like the music that play the Doomsday Zone music out or something like that, but I got to have like my own personal soundtrack in a sense. Yes, I liked music, but Omarion's Icebox doesn't really fit in as like, the main villain's theme song. So it was real awesome to have music as a reference for like basically playtime, for just imagination time. And I remember too that sound tests like were really fun, especially when I started getting into like handheld gaming. So like my first Game Boy Advance, for example, like I think it's also because it's like it was so memorable because it had, like they obviously knew they had to play out of a small speaker. Like, you just, it's a little small speaker. The screen wasn't even backlit yet on the handheld. So it's like, we better make this count, like I think the chipset for audio is honestly like just as good, if not worse than the Super Nintendo's. So especially like my first handheld experience, it was like, we really got to like, push the limits with the hardware here. It was awesome because Sonic actually continued this because they had the Advance series by, I think, Dips is the name of the company. Stupid hard. Like, I don't know why they were such masochists or whatever compared to like the original Sonic team. They really nailed everything about it. Like the vibe, the artwork is great. The music is fantastic, playing this video. But for some reason, they were just like, I never really, I think, beat them all the way through for that reason. But I would sit there in the sound test just straight out doing the same thing. And it was even more effective, because it was like a handheld. So you could take the music anywhere and listen back to it. And I'm probably pissed off like my parents listening to, music on a Game Boy Advance, just draining the battery, not even playing the game. But yeah, again, like the soundtrack of the game, like in the sound test, I would use it to just match it to what I was imagining in my head, whether that was with my action figures or like with my toys or with like freaking just drawing, like making up comics and stuff like that in my head, inventing these characters and these stories. Like it was really just great for that. Like the melodies themselves, I feel like would translate like past the quality of the Game Boy Advance hardware. Like, and this comes to mind really easily with the Harry Potter games on the Game Boy Advance. I like, they're so bad. You could compare them to like the one I, for example, played the most was Chamber of Secrets, and you could compare it to like the Game Boy Color version, like the last gen version of the same game. And really what sells it is still just the melodies. The melodies are great because in terms of like sound quality and sample selection or whatever, composition, it's not very good. But they just nailed like how catchy it is, and I love it, and I'll still listen to it to this day. You could even double up on this once I got earbuds. Like I think when I had my Game Boy, I might have had the SP already, and I don't think they were earbuds quite yet. I think they're still like the ones that go over your head. It was just like so like cool. Like I was even getting into like Game Boy Color music because every now and then I get like a Game Boy Color cart sound engine, and that is a lot more simplified, of course. But they would still like I would just be blown away that they would be making these musics that were just jams, and it's like so simple but so effective. And it's something that has to be playing constantly. Like as a kid, you're in the game and you want like the player to not get tired of it. So it's like I was interesting noticing that kind of stuff, like that part of the art form had to come through. And I really felt this with the Pokemon games because you would play like say Fire Red or Leaf Green, and like I would love the soundtrack. I'd love the songs from them so much, and then you'd get to compare them to like the original counterparts, and like you get to see like that's so cool that's how strong the melodies were in the original games, but they obviously like gave them an overhaul that worked out really well in the upgrades, in the next gen upgrades. And yeah, of course, sound tests and stuff continued on like, the PlayStation, the GameCube, the Dreamcast and stuff like that. But I guess they're not quite chiptune. Like they're not really what I'm looking for here. Just, I think even by the PlayStation, if I remember right, like you could just pop in the disc into a CD player and listen to the soundtrack on most games. What was so fun about sound tests, though, is that I think I mentioned at the start of this video, there's people out there that know exactly what I'm talking about. And they were making stuff when I was a teenager. Because what's cool is like, say like that whole, I guess kind of like how, like at the start of the 2010s, like everyone slowly started ramping up the 80s nostalgia. I think it peaked when Stranger Things came out, which funnily enough was 2016. But games also, I think, did this kind of thing where like everything indie was like pixel art. Like almost everything popular indie was pixel art. And if it wasn't pixel art, they definitely did this thing where it was either like chiptune music, like just straight out trying to make it sound like it came from a Nintendo or something like that, or it borrowed from it a lot and it did its own thing, but they were definitely using like, square waves and like sawtooths and stuff like that in their music, and a really like at the time anyways fresh and interesting way. At the very start of the decade you have bands like Anamanaguchi, and I think they're honestly the first time I noticed that like, oh, people are like purposely trying to make their music like sound like it comes from an old school game. Like that was real interesting to see that there's a band that's doing that, and with pixel art slowly getting more and more popular, like I remember playing games where I think that was part of what sold me on them anyways. Like I know I mentioned 6V's, VVV earlier at the start of the video, but there's games too that really just made an incredible impact on my life. I feel like growing up that also had that aesthetic. There's games like Cave Story. When they redid the music, it still has the elements of it, but especially the original soundtrack, complete, old school chiptune. Games like Undertale, which like a soundtrack that changed my life almost. I feel like I even own like the full like soundtrack on vinyl. Like they had like this huge deluxe edition for Undertale that came out a couple years ago, and I was like, I have to have this. There's no way I can't, with like detailed artwork and like 4 vinyl discs that are colored differently. And I remember like listening to the original Ruins theme, in like the first dungeon when I played the demo, and it stuck with me forever. And in the same way that those same games that like that inspired the soundtrack to Undertale, like it left me feeling the same way, which almost goes to show you like the power of music in that sense. Like it was a different experience, I guess, because by that point, like in the 2010s when I was a teenager, even the chiptune stuff, I guess, has become more of a soundtrack than like a sound test. Like you can find the VVV soundtrack or whatever on like Bandcamp. I think I remember finding it, which was fresh also at the time. You could find Cave Story soundtrack too, I think, and like honestly, I think you could find it on CD. And then obviously I mentioned like the Undertale vinyl and stuff like that. But overall, I think that's just like the gist of what I kind of wanted to touch on, just like the lost art form of a sound test. It's like something that you can use. Like it almost forces you to be more creative, I want to say. Like I don't hate on the streaming era at all. Like I think it's awesome. And I'm glad music is so accessible now, actually. Like even though I'm a musician and I technically make almost no money off of the streaming era nowadays, I think overall, like net benefits, like musicians though, the fact that people have really easy access to all music, like tons of music now, like it's a better place for sure. But I think with a sound test, like you have to load up the game, like you have to like be like you have to get really involved in it, you know. And I think here's what I mean by that. Like with streaming, like I'm glad it's accessible and it's easy for everyone, but you can kind of like, you know, like yeah, sometimes you'll run into it because of you know, like a Discover Weekly algorithm type of thing. Sometimes it's because like, you know, your favorite indie reviewer or whatever the heck on the internet reviewed it, and it's kind of like okay, you know. And I guess with games, it's like you're almost forced to participate in it because it's a game. You know, it's like you can't just like I'm not gonna like buy this game just so I can hear the sound test on it. You know, like it's no, that's not it. And I think too, a lot of the times sound tests tend to be like an unlockable itself too. So it's like something that you technically like don't get access to sometimes until you've hit a certain milestone in the game. And I think too, by design, like a sound test is just one of those like, well, you've played through the game, you know, at least part way through, or maybe you played at the very start of the game, like how I did at the start of this video, and you're just hyping yourself up for the rest of the game. But normally when you hear a sound test, you get to reflect back on like certain parts of the games that you like loved, or parts of the games that maybe pissed you off, or parts of the games that made you feel a certain type of way. But there's certainly something that I do miss about just not that games don't have it anymore. I'm sure games do have some type of sound test in them, but I think the idea that that was the only option at one point when I was a kid to listen to gaming soundtracks was just that. And I think the fact that you can associate most of them with like 8-bit music, with chiptune music, it just signifies, I think, a different era that I was thinking about a lot today, and I just wanted to gush about it. So that was it for this video. Thank you for watching up to this point. If you have, let me know if you're a big fan of sound tests. What were your favorites? Are you not part of like that whole chiptune 8-bit era like I was? Maybe you really like listening to the Spider-Man soundtrack on the PlayStation now as your jam, and that's cool too. But again, thank you if you watched up to this point. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this and you want to like just talk about more random offbeat things about gaming. Definitely going to be here. Other than that though, I will catch you guys very, very soon. And please do me a favor and ride off into the sunset listening to your favorite 8-bit tunes.